You may have noticed that when we wrote our recipe in our main lesson book, we used measurements for how much of our ingredients we put in our cake. Things like 1 cup or 1 teaspoon. I want to talk about that a bit today. When we measure liquids, can we measure them with a ruler or a meter stick? Not really. We can't really pour out a meter of water unless we have something to hold it. So what if I were to just pour out some water into the containers and measure that? Do you think that would work? Probably not. Why won't that work? Well, do you think that, let's look at these two. If I had, let's say, 1 inch of water, let's try it out once. I'm going to measure 1 inch of water in this smaller cup and 1 inch of water in this bigger cup and see what happens. Oh boy, I hope I don't spill. I have a really full jug. And I'm going to measure where I can see the ruler over here actually, and hopefully, and then I'll show you that it measures 1 inch. All right, that's about 1 inch of water. That's also, well, I think it's not quite even. So if I measure 1 inch, they should be exactly the same amount of water as far as how high up it goes, right? Because I'm measuring 1 inch from the bottom of the cart, and 1 inch up is going to be 1 inch up either way. Now let's measure it. I have a measuring cup right here. You may have seen something like this. This is a measuring cup that we would call maybe a graduated measuring cup, because it has these little lines on it that tells us that this is 1 whole cup. And I have the first mark down at the bottom says 1/4, 1 with a line and then a 4. I don't know if you can really see that or not. Let me just see if I can get close enough. Okay, you can. So 1/4, and then there's 1/2, which is 1/2, 3/4, which is 3/4. Now that means that, you notice there's a 4 on the bottom, or there's not a 4 on the bottom of each of these, but there's a 4 on the bottom of this one and this one. So for this one, it means that I've divided this cup into 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 parts. This is one of those 4 parts. Now really, this is a little confusing, but I could write this as 2/4. They didn't, because it's simpler to think of it as half, right? Because that's half of this. But it's also 2/4. If I'm using this one and this one, so that's 2 if I've divided it into 4. And then here I have 3/4 or 3/4. So that's 1, 2, 3 parts. And then all the way up to the top would be 4/4 or 4/4. And that's 1 whole cup. I also have this divided into thirds. It's really hard to read that, but that says 1/3, and that says 2/3. So here you can see there's 1, 2, 3 parts. This is one of those 3 parts. Up to here would be 2 of these 3 parts, and up to 3 would be 3 of the 3 parts. So that's what 1 cup looks like. And so that way I can actually see with just this 1 cup how far I've gone. So let's measure what I poured out. So first I'll do this smaller cup. I'm going to pour it in here. And it's just about, I'm going to set it down so I can really read it right. It's really between the 1/4 and the 1/3. So we don't have to get too exact here, but let's just see what the other one measures. I'm going to pour this back into here. So it was between the 1/4 and the 1/3. And then I'll pour this one. Oh goodness. This one went all the way up. I know you can't see this, but I can. You have to take my word for it. It went all the way up to 1/2. So this one held more water than this one, even though they were both 1 inch of water tall. So we can't measure with a stick unless we know exactly how big around the cup is going to be. And we might want a cup that's smaller around sometimes and a cup that's bigger around sometimes. So we don't measure that way. Instead, we measure how much a certain container holds. And we have containers that are specifically designed to hold exactly a certain amount. So I'm going to start with the biggest one. Now you may have seen, let's see, I've got all my water back. You may have seen a jug like this before. You might also buy milk in a jug like this. I've bought some water in this jug. But this is called a gallon. This is pretty much the biggest amount of a liquid that you would probably buy at a store. Now, if I were making, say, apple juice, I might sell it in about a gallon jug, or I think maybe the juices that you buy in the glass jug, I think it's about 3/4 of a gallon, so a little bit less than this. You'll notice that glass jug is a little smaller than this one. But if I were making a bunch of apple juice to sell, I might actually even put it into a keg or a barrel, which is a bigger unit of measurement, but I don't have anything that big. Most people don't buy things that big. We buy something this big because it'll fit on our shelf or in our refrigerator. But if I'm producing stuff to sell, I might even have a bigger quantity. So let's see how much is in a gallon. All right, so our next unit down is a quart. This is a quart jar. And these are often used, you'll see people use these for canning because it gives you a very good idea of how much is in that can. And I'm using a lot of canning jars here because they're measured out just very specifically. You might buy spaghetti sauce in something about this size, but it's probably not a whole quart. A lot of times a spaghetti jar will be a little smaller than a quart, just like an apple juice jar might be smaller than a gallon. Let's see how many quarts there are in this gallon. So I'm going to fill it just to this part here. I'm not going to fill it to the very top here because you wouldn't fill something right to there in this kind of container. You would with a measuring cup for baking though, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So let's first see how many quarts we can get out of this gallon. There's one. There's two. Three. Oh boy, do you think I'll get another one? Let's see what happens. Four. Now wait, this is gonna go, let's see. I'm gonna fill them all. I'm gonna get rid of all this water and see how high up they go. Maybe it does go right to the top. Oh, it might. I think it will. Gotta be really careful here that I don't spill it. These are super full. Oh, I've still got a tiny bit left in here. And it says that it's exactly 1 gallon on here. So these must be just a hair under, but the idea is that this is just about gone. There's about 4 quarts to this gallon. What's the next one down? The next one down is a size that you might drink out of a lot. We have a lot of these glasses at my house. It's a pint glass. So I have a 1 pint glass here. Let's see. Actually, before we do that, I'm a little afraid of these waters all sitting here. So I'm going to pour some of these back because I don't want them all sitting here waiting to spill all over everything. If I were at home, I would do this over the sink or in the kitchen and not right where I want to keep all my nice paper stuff. Dry that off. Can you see that? That's about half a gallon right there. You can tell. Alrighty. All right. And oh, I'm doing pretty good here, but I'm spilling a little bit. All right. Now, let's see. Okay, now we've got this pint glass. All right, let's see. I'm gonna put this gallon down here too. And I think I might just spread this cloth out underneath me in case I dribble a little bit. All right. I find it easier to pour without spilling if I hold both and kind of go for it. But, you know, I used to be a waitress, so I'm used to like pouring drinks really well. And this is a tricky thing to do, so pour it over the sink so you don't spill too much. But here I go. I'm gonna pour this quart into this pint and see how much I get. Okay, I'm not gonna fill completely to the top. There we go, there's 1 pint. Now, I also have this labeled as a pint. Does it look like it's the same amount? What do you think? Is that gonna hold the same amount of water? I've labeled them both pint. I want to see. Actually, I'm going to fill this up. This looks like about a half of that, but I'm going to fill this up all the way. Okay. So we can see what happens. Let's see if this pint is the same as this pint. It is. They hold exactly the same amount. Isn't that crazy? It seems like this one would hold more, doesn't it? And I actually had this one filled up all the way to the top. And this one, you probably can't see it, but it's only filled up to about here. I still have a little ways to go. So I wonder if I could get this whole half quart into this one. Let's see what happens. I might have to put some more in this one. Yep, so again, that one's filled up. That one I can fill off, top off a little bit more. So I think that this one actually holds even a tiny, it's more just like the amount that you wouldn't want to overfill a cup, right? So if I'm going to drink out of this cup, I probably wouldn't want to drink I wouldn't want to put a whole pint of something in here. This kind of cup is meant to be used for drinking a smaller amount, like a can of water or something like that, or a can of soda maybe. But so you can imagine what a can looks like. I'm gonna throw out another kind of measurement that we'll talk about later, but a can is 12 ounces, whereas this is actually 16 ounces. So that's a weight measurement, and we'll talk about that later, but I just want to talk about you know, what you would actually want to put in this cup that you wouldn't put maybe a big bottle of soda in, that it has a little bit more in it, you'd only want to put a can that has a little less. Okay, so we have this quart jar poured out to 2 pints. I want to just prove to you that this is really 2 pints that are the same too. I have another pint cup here, just so we can really prove it, because I know it's hard to believe when you look at this and that, they don't look the same. So I'll pour this, and you can see again that that's the same. I do have a tiny bit left in here, so this does hold just a little bit more than this. All right, the next measure, what do you think would come after this? Something about half this size, right? Maybe something about this size. This is 1 cup. It should be the same as this. So we'll see how they match up. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and take one of these. I'm gonna, actually maybe I will put some of that back in here. I'll leave that out so we can see it. But I want to get rid of one of these because I don't want all this water sitting out for me to spill. Whoa, I forgot that had water in it. Spill it some more. I just noticed there was some water on the table that I wanted to clean up, and I forgot I had water in this cup. Okay, so let's set that down and get a hold of it a little bit better. Oops, this is coming off. So this is a cup. Oh, and it's getting wet. It doesn't want to stick on there, but we'll see. Okay, so pour that in. Oh, I'm making such a big mess here. Okay, there's 1 cup. And there's the other cup. And those actually filled up exactly to the brim. So they're just right up to the top. So we can see that there are 2 cups in that pint. All right, let's, I'll put this over here so we can remember that too. Now I want to make sure, let's just see, because this, again, does this look like it's the same size? It's roughly the same size, but we want to see if it really is. Let's prove it. We prove it by pouring this one into this one and seeing if they really are the same amount. All right, here we go. I'm going to step back actually. Kind of ruining my paper on my tray here. Oh, exactly. It filled up exactly as much. So this is exactly 1 cup, just like we would use if we were baking, because this is a baking cup and this is a canning cup, and they hold exactly the same amount of water. Okay, now I'm going to, let's see, that one's full of water and that one's full of water. So it's hard for me to see if they're full of water or not, because water is so hard to see. Okay, and now I'm going to pour this one back in here, just so I don't spill it. And now let's talk about this cup. How much is in this cup? Well, imagine for a moment that we were going to make our thunder cake, but we were going to make it as a wedding cake, and we were going to have 100 people at our wedding. Do you think that that thunder cake would serve 100 people? Probably not. You would need to make a lot of cakes, and it would probably make sense. You probably couldn't mix up all the batter at once for what you're doing, but you could double the recipe or triple it or quadruple it to make a bigger recipe to make more cake. And so if I were doing that, and if I were measuring out a cup of something and I wanted to make 4 times the recipe, 4 times as much, so enough to make 4 cakes. Instead of using this cup, what could I use to measure something? If I had, let's say 1 cup of milk in something, what could I use instead of this to measure 4 cups? Well, let's see. If I were to measure 2 cups at once, I could use a pint, and I'm actually gonna go with this pint because this is a little bit more accurate, I think. So I could use this pint. And how many pints were in the quart? 2 pints were in the quart. So I could, if I needed to make 4 times the recipe from 1 cup of milk, I could actually just use a quart to measure it, couldn't I? How about the teaspoons? We haven't gotten to teaspoons yet. We'll get there a little bit later, but let's see, we did talk about, in our recipe, we had a teaspoon of salt or something like that. So if I were to make a whole bunch of these, I could scoop out 1, 2, 3, 4, but I might want to know what I could use instead to measure a lot of these. So let's break this down even further. And first we're going to break down this cup that I poured out here. I am just destroying, I'm going to get another rag. I'm really making a mess here, and I'm kind of ruining this pad that I have here. But that's okay, there are other ones. All right, so I have this cup, and I want to see how much is in it. So I was mentioning before that this had the little lines. You might also have seen a set of measuring cups that looks like something like this, where there are several sizes of cup. And you can see on these that each one has the different sizes, see, clearly labeled right on it. So I have 1 cup, and see, this one doesn't have any markings on it. So I would probably use this only if I was really going to just measure 1 cup. The next smallest one I have is a 1/2 cup. And let's just show you. You can see that 1/2 cup, it's about half the size. It's not half as tall, but it is half the size, even though it doesn't look like it's exactly half. That's what half of that cup would look like. The next one down, let me show you all 3 of them again. So the next one down is 1/3. So that would be the one where if I had divided the cup, the big cup, into 3 equal parts, that would be this one. And then the last one that I have is 1/4 cup. And you can, so that one actually looks maybe more like it'd be half of the size, but it's really little, actually. It's 1/4. So that's if I divided this into 4, and that's just one of those 4 sections. Okay, so let's prove it. All right, so here I have my 1 cup, and let's see if I can fit 2 of these into there. So I'm spilling a little. Okay, so there's 1. And there's 2. I'm a little bit shy, but I also have spilled a bit by now, so I'm actually, I bet I've got enough in here that I can pour that. That was my little extra from before. Okay, so I just proved to you that there are 2 of these in 1 of these because I poured out this and it filled this 1/2 cup up 2 times. Let's see, so we know that there's 1 cup in here. This much is in here right now. Maybe a drop or 2 more or less because I'm spilling a little bit. So we have to keep that in mind too. Okay, so now let's see. Let's try the 1/3, 1/3. I'm gonna pour it into here as I go because I don't want to pour it back in there and spill a bunch more. All right, so here's 1. Oh, I really filled that up. 1, 2, 3. Exactly 3 of these were in that, 1 cup. All right, how about this 1/4 cup? This back here. 1, 2, 3, 4. There it was, 4 1/4 into one of these 1 cups. Now, let's see, I wonder, do you think it works for these two? How many of these should be in this one, do you think? Well, if this is 1 of the 4 parts and this is 2 of the 4 parts, there should be 2 of these in one of these. Let's try it. Where's my water? Okay, here it is. Oops, that's like almost too full. 1, filled it about halfway up. 2, oh, exactly. Yep, just barely enough room for me to pick this up and move it. So there were 2 of these in one of these. Now, the next one down, we start moving to these little spoons, and you can see that these spoons kind of feel like the next thing down. Oops, let me put them in order. So if I've got my 1/4 cup, you see how they're just sort of the next size down from that. It was a little awkward. Okay, so let's see. I wonder how many tablespoons. So let me tell you what these guys are. This big one is called a tablespoon. And you might experiment at home. If you can find a tablespoon like this that's used for measuring and says 1 tablespoon on it, and it would be wherever you keep your baking supplies in your house. And then I want you to find a spoon that you might use to eat soup with. That, not like a tiny little spoon that you might eat your dessert with, but a bigger spoon that you might eat your soup with. See if it's the same size. I bet it's about the same size. How can you tell? Fill this with water and pour it into that one, right? So that would be a fun thing for you to try at home and see if it's the same size. I want to know how many, let's say I had a recipe that called for 20 tablespoons of something. I don't want to measure 20 tablespoons. What could I do instead? Let's see how many of these make up a 1/4 cup, because that would be a little bit easier to measure. Once I know how many of these are in a 1/4 cup, I could almost, if I needed 20 of these, I could almost go up and measure it with cups, couldn't I? If I knew how to convert those. So let's just go ahead and pour. I'm going to fill 1 tablespoon, pour it into 1/4 cup. 1, kind of tipping. 2, 3, and it is full. So there are 3 tablespoons in 1/4 cup. The next one down is called a teaspoon. Now a teaspoon, so if you think about these words, a tablespoon might be what you set on your table when you're going to eat your soup. What do you think you might use a teaspoon for? Stirring your tea, right? So would you use a really big spoon to stir your tea? No, you don't need a big spoon. You need a delicate little spoon to stir your tea. So this might be, you might see if your teaspoon is the same size as a smaller spoon that you have in your house. So let's see right now, how many teaspoons are in a tablespoon? I think I'm just gonna scoop, because that might be easier. So I'm pouring this into my 1/2 cup so that I can hold this and this at the same time. So I'm scooping up 1 teaspoon. 1, 2. That looks about full. Can I fit another one in, or is it going to spill over? Oh, it did spill a little bit. I think it's about 2 teaspoons to a tablespoon. Does that seem right? Let's try it the other direction. I always thought it was, again, 3, but maybe not. Okay, so I've got a good tablespoon there. Oh, I'm spilling. 1, 2. Oh, it's only 2 teaspoons to the tablespoon. How many? So now the next one down is a half teaspoon. 1/2 teaspoon. What's your guess? How many half teaspoons will there be in 1 teaspoon? Did you say 2? Let's see. All right, so I'll go with the half teaspoon. Going once, going twice, and that is definitely full. Yes, there is nothing else that's gonna fit in there. All right, and then the next one down is 1/4 teaspoon and 1/2 teaspoon. What do you think? Now when we did the cups, there were 2 1/4 cups in 1/2, right? So how many 1/4 teaspoons do you think there'll be in a 1/2 teaspoon? Should we see? So I've got that 1/4 teaspoon going once, 1/4 teaspoon twice, and that is a full 1/2 teaspoon. Sometimes a recipe does something funny. It calls for 3/4 of a teaspoon. What are you supposed to do with that? You don't have a 3/4 of a teaspoon. Well, if you know that 3/4 means that you've divided it into 4 pieces and you're filling it up 3 of them tall, what could you do? Well, you could start with your 1/2 teaspoon, go up halfway, and then add another 1/4, and that'll get you 3/4. Or you could just take the 1/4 teaspoon and scoop it 3 times. That's another way to do it. So that's another way. So that is our measuring implements for when we're baking things or cooking things. That's the kind of measurement stuff we have in the kitchen. And this is what we might go all the way up to quarts and even up to gallons if we do some canning of our vegetables or our fruits or things like that when we're doing our gardening and farming. Or we might not use these as much, but we probably use these kinds of cups a lot. I know I do at my house. So this would be a fun experiment for you to try on your own. Go ahead and see if you can collect these things and do your own experimenting. See if I'm right. And let me know how it goes.